Welcome, Chad. It's great to have you on the show. Would you please let our audience know a little bit about your background and what you've been doing so they're understanding where we're going today?
Sure thing. Thank you for having me on your show, and I appreciate the time being with you. My name's Chad Peterson. I am a business broker. A lot of people don't know really what that is. They think that I find buyers and find sellers, and that's 1% of what I do. But really, what I do is I make deals happen. And so, if you have a business that you'd like to sell, you come to me, and I handle the process from start to finish. Included in the process is, of course, me finding the right buyer for your business and putting them through the paces of getting them the loan to buy the business, handling the contracts, handling the valuation, putting together a confidential business review, handling the non-disclosure agreements. I do all that stuff. So from start to finish, I handle any sort of merger or an acquisition, and I do it from a business broker standpoint. Um, my background is simply this. I was a little kid bit by the entrepreneurial bug, and I've had it forever, maybe at birth, I don't know. But as a little kid, I would knock on doors and I would just pester the hell out of people because I wanted to do something at their house to make some money. I learned real early on that, people need things done around their house and they'll pay me a couple bucks. And at that point, it made sense. What do I care? I'm a little kid. I got nothing else to do. So I'd knock on doors until it was dark and just say, "Hey, I'm Chad. I'd like to do something here for your house for some money." Nowadays, I don't think that would even be, I don't think I would allow my kid to do that. The world's changed, or maybe it was just as bad back then as it is now. I don't know. But I'd be out till 9 o'clock knocking on doors. And I built a company throughout my teenage years that actually was a substantial company. It wasn't like I was just a teenager trying to make a few bucks. I built that company. I was making more money than my teachers were. And I ended up selling that company. And that was my first taste of building a company and selling it. And it didn't matter what I had to do when I was a kid, whether it was, uh, picking up dog shit, or if it was picking weeds out of flowers, or if it was shoveling snow or whatever. It didn't matter what I did. And so I always had that mentality of whatever it takes, I will do it. And I sold my company and I ended up deciding I wanted to go fly planes. I would never work for somebody else because I'm eternally self-employed. I'd be the worst employee known to man. But I ended up packing up all my things and going to Florida, and I became a commercial pilot down there. And I actually was flying a plane during 9/11 right next to Air Force One in Orlando, Florida, headed towards international. And I was diverted and told to get out of the sky. And about 2 months after that was the end of my career. So I went back to being self employed, starting businesses, building them, and selling them.
So I'm curious, Chad, why would you, as a self-starter, be like the worst employee ever? Because I know some people are tempted to hire self-starters, other people are entrepreneurs. So, I mean, in your case, why do you think you'd be the worst employee?
Well, not because I would be, but because the expectations of the employers would be so off balance that they would make me the bad employee. I've built multi-million-dollar companies. I was a millionaire by the time I was 25. I was bringing in $7 to $10 million a year in between the years of 2003 all the way to the bust where I got crushed in 2008. Now, if an employer knew how to hire me, and if I could get passionate enough for that employer's dreams, I'd be the best employee. But as soon as somebody tries to employ me, all bets are off. I don't want to, I'm not manageable, put it that way. So that's why I say that. But I was flying a plane in 9/11, lost my career. I built companies, sold them, built them, sold them. And through that journey, I understood the psychological process of building a company, the stress that it takes, what it takes to really be successful. Um, all the ups and downs and ins and outs of it. I've employed over 1,000 people. And it was just exhausting. And finally, I decided after I sold 6 of my own companies that I would never do that again, and that I'll only work by helping other people sell their business. And so I've got a real unique vantage point that I'm not some burned out real estate agent. I'm not some guy that had a fairly decent job as a C-level executive somewhere. I'm not just some stuffed suit guy that just wants to try to sell something. I've actually been self-employed my entire life. So I bring that kind of experience to the buyers and the sellers and to the transaction.
So you say that you know what it takes to build a business, and I mean, a little bit of a segue for us. But I'm kind of curious. You've had many businesses. You've employed over 1,000 people. From your perspective, what is that piece of the puzzle? What does it take to really build a business?
Well, I think it starts emotionally first, because you can't do anything unless you're 100% aligned with what you're supposed to be doing. I sell businesses and I will forever. And the reason that I know that I'll do it forever is because there's a visceral love for it that I have. I have a love for um, talking to the self-employed, helping the self-employed. The self-employed ones are my people. Now, if I didn't have that passion, if I didn't know that that's where I was supposed to be, then I would go into whatever venture it would be, and I wouldn't be 100% aligned with what I was supposed to do. So the first thing to be successful, you have to be aligned with it. If you don't want to do it, if you're not passionate about it, if there's not a driving, burning sensation inside of you to go do that thing every day, then you've already started off on a false platform, and you'll probably never get there. Secondly, um, I mean, most businesses, you're going to have employees, and you have to have that component figured out. You have to have the management figured out. If you don't, that's going to be one of the biggest holes in your game plan. Um, Thirdly, marketing. Okay. If you don't know how to market and you don't know how to manage and you don't have the passion behind what you're trying to do, you're sunk. So, in any business that I ever built, given what I just told you, I started to do terribly whenever those things weren't in line. So, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a business owner. There's a very distinct difference between those two. A business owner can go in and do it day to day. It's more of a managerial position. Somebody who likes to hover over it and nurture it and water it and groom it to health every day. That's what a business owner is. An entrepreneur is somebody who is the builder. He's the one that has the vision. The Walt Disneys and the Henry Fords of the world. They never were responsible for managing their companies, and if they did, they probably wouldn't have been successful. So for me, I know that if I lose 10% of passion, then I'm 100% out. Because if I can't have that, and if I have to spend all my time mustering up false passion to contend with those that are passionate about what they're doing, I'm going to be dead in the water. Can you imagine go back in the day? Can you imagine go back and be let's just say you had to fight Mike Tyson. Can you imagine not really wanting to be there? And
Yeah, I don't want to be there. Yeah,
well,
but
ironically,
I'm
yeah.
curious, when you talk about doing the business buying and selling, how do you assess passion and how well it's connected to employees in an organization, either that you're going to represent to be sold or to help that assess that when you're helping somebody buy it?
Well, typically, whenever I sell a business, there's a passion problem. They're burnt out and they're bored. They're not selling. I mean, a lot of people come to me and they're making tons of money. So on paper, logically, it makes no sense to sell the business. Why would you? And the reason is there's a passion problem. They're burnt out and they're bored. But let me finish my point. When Mike Tyson got tired of what he was doing, when there was no passion in it, he began getting beat. And whenever they asked him after he got knocked out by Douglas, I think it was, they said, Mike, why are you still doing this? You're not the champ you used to be. And he said, it's just not in my heart. If you don't have that passion in your heart for it, you're going to get beat by somebody in your industry. Now, whether it's you being a podcaster, you want to make the greatest podcast out there. Well, you can, as long as you're driven and passionate for it. But if you're not, it's going to show up. It's going to be inauthentic. The market's going to see it. And in the question you just asked me about the employees, how is that an issue? Well, you have to be passionate about what you're doing, and it can't be about the money. If it was about the money, then Warren Buffett would have quit. Jeff Bezos would have quit. I mean, Jeff Bezos just gave his ex-wife like $38 billion or something. I mean, he still doesn't have to work. He could quit today, but he's passionate about it. So I think that's your answer. You have to have that. Um, but your employees are going to pick up on it. Your customers will pick up on it. It's just not going to be as robust of an effort if you don't have that in you.
Okay. Now, I saw something curious for me anyway in your profile, that you use the term aggressive in describing yourself as a business broker. I think of a lot of terms somebody might use, but when you say the word aggressive, what do you mean, and how does that distinguish you from someone else in the game?
Well, a lot of ways. I fire a lot of people. I fire clients. I don't bring on all clients. If a buyer's not behaving, if a seller's not behaving, I will fire either one of them. I know what it takes to get there. And if people get in my way and they're bringing their personality problems to the equation and we can't get to the table, I'm aggressive in my stance. Entitlement's a big issue when it comes to sellers. When they go to sell their business, they think, number one, that their business is worth far more than what it really is. And number two, they become entitled, like they've got something and somebody else, wants it and it's at this price tag and they're not going to take any less. And it's their baby. It's like giving their daughter away, the day of the wedding, or dropping your kid off to kindergarten. It's a tear-jerking moment whenever you have to sell your business. But the fact is that somebody's about to go spend $4 million on your business. So let's put the compassion towards the buyer. So I'm very aggressive in pursuing buyers and managing the psychological process between the buyer and the seller to get it to close. Most brokers that are in my industry, I call them paycheck professionals. They're in this business for a paycheck. They're really not professionals at what they do. I don't need a paycheck. I'm not here to run a non-for-profit organization either, but I don't need a paycheck. So I don't need to take on a business that isn't right to sell. I don't need to compromise my business.
So help me understand. You've got somebody who wants to sell their business. They think their price, their valuation is X. You don't think it's that high. How do you help them, with a reality check?
Well, I tell them exactly what it's worth, number one, and how I do that as I go through the tax returns. I figure out the earnings. I figure out any add backs, like seller's discretionary earnings add backs, whether it's, lifestyle expenses, meals, travel, entertainment, 401k, IRA, health insurance, cars, things like that. I add it all back in there. I give them a number that it's worth based on what I know about the market and what I know about bankability. And 8 out of 10 people are going to say that's far too low. It's worth way more than that. And I say, no, it isn't. And if they don't agree to the price, I just don't bring them on as a customer because I already know it's not going to go for that price. So that's where you could say I'm aggressive too. I'm aggressive on pricing. I'm not going to bring somebody on with unrealistic expectations. I work 7 days a week, not because I have to, but because I want to. Most brokers in my industry, like I said, they're paycheck professionals. They usually come in the office around 7:30. And by the way, nobody wants to hear from a broker at 7:30 in the morning. Everybody's getting ready for work, driving in traffic. So that's a waste of time. They're usually at lunch by 11. They're usually having cocktails by 1. That's the typical business broker. 55, 60 years old, no energy, no gumption, no drive, no determination. That's not me.
So I'm curious, as you work with these companies, what are, maybe you've got some examples that through 3 things maybe that sellers try to hide in the process selling their company?
Well, they usually try to hide their earnings above all things. That's the biggest mistake. I mean, the IRS tax code allows us to write off things in our business. I mean, it's one of the biggest perks of being self-employed, but you can abuse that. So let's just say that, if you really claimed all your earnings and you didn't live out of your business, and let's just say you could show $300,000 in earnings, but because you're living out of your business and writing it off as expenses, now you've beat the earnings down to 125,000. Well, now your business is worth less. So number one, they try to hide earnings. As far as the second most prevalent thing that they try to hide is the fact that they're going to sell to their employees. So it's fine if you don't want to tell your employees you're selling, but at some point you're going to have to, right? So we can say, all right, we're not gonna tell your employees because, oh no, they might quit or something. That's usually a fear that they have. And I say, wait a minute, you want me to sell your business and you want me to spend 6 or 8 months selling your business, and you don't want to tell your employees now that you're going to sell, because if we do tell them that we're going to sell, they might quit. Let me tell you something. I don't want to work for you for 6 or 8 months if you don't have the balls to figure out a way to tell your employees that you're going to sell now. Why drag me through a garden hose by a nose ring for the next 8 months if you think that telling your employees that you're going to sell is going to make them quit? Number one, I don't want to put the work in. And number two, who wants to buy that company? If everybody's going to quit, who wants to buy it? So they automatically reveal themselves to me that they're not a client of mine if they start talking like that. So the things that they try to hide, I figure out, and I won't bring them on as a client.
Well, that makes sense. Now I'm curious about the as a buyer, put myself in a buyer's seat. What are like three of the most common mistakes that you've seen buyers make? That I would think. I know for me, I'd have to protect myself from being too optimistic. But what do you typically see?
It's a wonderful question, and I want to give you a wonderful answer, but I think you've kind of already given me a little something to go on, and that really is that people don't have the right expectation of the business, probably because they don't have the trust in the broker. In other words, if you're with a good broker, somebody who's really done their homework on the business, and you can trust that guy, then your trepidation should be reduced. It's no different. Let's just say you had $1 million sitting in an account and you wanted somebody to manage that money for you. Well, if I don't really trust the guy, I'm not going to be I'm not going to be too confident. Nor do I understand the stock market and the various vehicles of investments enough to make my own decisions. So naturally, I'm operating from a trepidatious standpoint. But if you trust the broker that you're working with has done his homework, then it makes all the difference. So I would say find a good broker and have your expectations set by the broker. In other words, if you're the buyer and you contact me, because that's the situation you gave me. You said pretend I'm the buyer. If I sent you an email on a new opportunity that came out and you emailed me back and said, Chad, what do you think about this? Every Christmas tree has a brown spot. Every Christmas tree has the side that we don't really like, and we put that up against the wall. Doesn't mean that we don't have Christmas because we don't have a perfect tree. Perfection doesn't happen in people. Perfection doesn't happen in business. And in this analogy, it doesn't happen in Christmas trees either. So, we have to talk about the bad spots of the business. So if you were to call me, I would say, here's the problem with the business. Here's how you can fix it. Here's how you could see a long-term win if you were to fill the holes in this business. What that does is it allows you to see growth post-sale. I've sold several businesses where after the sale, they've doubled, if not tripled their earnings. And it's because of the insight that I gave them on the front end. And if you go to my site, by the way, if you go to Peterson Acquisitions, those aren't paid actors that go on there to give you those testimonials. In fact, they're unprovoked. They're not even summoned to go there. I have the guy who does my video contact former clients of mine. They come in and they get to say whatever they want to say. And I really do. And this goes back to my earlier statement of you got to be passionate about what you're doing. I love the self-employed people. That's who I am. I don't have much in common with a cubicle dweller. I don't have anything in common with an engineer or an architect. Not really my people. My people are self-employed, the entrepreneurs. So I end up becoming friends with them after the sale, and that's only because they can trust what I've told them, and I've given them my integrity and my good solid handshake on the front end of it. And after they've spent a million or two or $3 or $4 million on a deal, they look back and realize that I was giving it to them straight. So again, find a good broker that will ease your trepidation, and listen to the broker that's done his homework.
So I'm curious, a lot of people, myself included, recommend that when you're acquiring a company, you would typically only do an asset purchase. So what are your thoughts on that versus, doing an asset purchase versus buying an entire corporation where there might be some liabilities that you're not aware of for some reason?
Well, yes, you should almost always do an asset purchase agreement. And the reason is from a tax perspective. If you buy stock, you're not going to have the depreciation. And depending on the asset value of the business, let's just say you had $1 million in assets. Well, you would get to depreciate that. But if you bought a stock sale, you would not be able to do so. And there is the liability factor. I don't find that that's as common. That old Mark Twain quote, I'm an old man and I've seen a great many trouble, but few of them ever happened. So most trouble is in our mind.
Sounds like the coronavirus, but I don't want to be mean to
Correct.
anybody who has health
Correct.
issues, because if you have health issues, you got to worry about any flu. But
Yeah,
this one
correct.
seems way blown out of proportion.
It is. It is
Yeah.
totally. It's media hype to the fullest extent.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what that is too. The stock sale. You're not going to buy a company and all of a sudden have huge lawsuits and all. I mean, typically not. But really large companies, you're talking, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of companies, if not billions. It cannot be an asset purchase agreement. It's going to have to be a stock purchase agreement. But for the most of the market, you want to do an asset purchase agreement, and anything other than that would be foolish.
Can you give me an example of where there was a reason to keep the founder on or the owner on after the purchase, and why that made sense and it worked, and similar scenario, but it didn't work?
Well, it happens a lot. Smaller companies, sometimes there's a need to keep the owner around to maintain some relationships, because the coronavirus like fear of, okay, the seller is going to leave and so everybody's going to quit doing business with us. And that again, that's not true. I'll give you a bigger example though. Do you remember the guy from the Men's Warehouse, George Zimmerman? Was that
That's
his
right.
name?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he wasn't with the company for like the last 15 years, but they kept him on just to be the face of the company. That happens. And he had no ownership in that company. He was simply paid as a advertiser or a personality. So there, some things like that happen. Um, Most banks, though, won't allow the seller to stick around for more than 12 months. And the reason is because it opens you up to liability. So let's just say you buy a business and the owner sticks around for a year and a half. If something were to go wrong, which by the way, a good broker will not get you in that position. But if something were to go wrong, now there's too much latitude for either side to go to court and say it's because that son of a bitch stuck around for too long and he's impeding on my business and he won't get out of the way and he's making decisions that's destroying my business, and it becomes an argument. So the banks make the seller leave the business at 12 months. You cannot stay longer than 12 months. It does happen. People do it, but they're begging for liability issues if something were to go wrong. Because how often do marriages fail, and how often do businesses fail? Quite a bit. And so if you've stayed in that business as a seller for more than 12 months, you've complicated any sort of clear-cut court case, and banks try to prevent that loss by
Is
preventing
is
that
there
happening.
any way to structure the legal liabilities so that doesn't happen where the seller actually enjoys what they want to do. They just want to give up the management piece and maybe just do client relationships or something for a while.
Well, it has happened as of late. Just about 3 months ago, I sold a window and siding company, and just fantastic guys. I mean, buyer and seller, and their families, fantastic people, and they were able to pull it off because what happened was the guy that sold the business, he had a business partner, and the business partner was just sitting on his ass. He wasn't doing anything, so that was the motive to sell. So as soon as he sold his business and now he was sitting at home doing nothing, it was driving him crazy. So after like 8 or 9 months of after we sold it, he was just going stir crazy. And he contacted me and said, "Chad, do you think that'd be possible to do?" And I said, "Well, maybe." So I contacted the buyer and I said, "What do you think?" And they opened him with open arms, and they're doing really well together. And that's one of the companies that have tripled their business since they bought the business, and
Yeah.
the seller still remains there. To answer your question, one thing you can do is you can pay on as a contract employee. It's a lot easier. It's a lot safer, I should say, to pay as a 1099 contract employee than it is to bring on the former seller as a W-2 employee. That'd be a big no-no.
Yeah, you just have to be careful how you structure it with all the different
Yep.
laws and everything like that.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said earlier where you talked about letting your employees know when you're thinking of selling the organization. So, have you helped employees do a buyout? Or maybe maybe it's not all employees like an ESOP, but maybe there's a couple of superstars and so they want to do the buyout. What's it? Does that happen often?
It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. We did one about a year or so ago. Not even, I guess, about 8 months ago. We sold I sold a duct cleaning business, like an air duct cleaning
Yeah.
business, and the manager of it, pretty much like the right hand man of it, he wanted to buy the business. The problem is he didn't have the dry powder. He didn't have the money to buy it. He didn't have the down payment money. Businesses require a 10% down payment in order to purchase the business. In this case, that would have been $180,000. And by the time we looked at his, or no, it would have been no, that would have been $260,000. 10% would have been 260 on that one. And we looked at his house, looked at all, he basically didn't, he couldn't have begged, borrowed, and stealed for that kind of money. So interestingly enough, we tried it. We tried to get the bank to provide latitude because of his experience. We tried to get them to do it with less money down. We tried to get creative. We tried to do a seller carry to lend him the money. We tried everything under the sun. And so what we did at that point is we shifted gears, and instead of marketing for a buyer, we started marketing for a majority owner. That way, the new owner, the majority owner, came in, and he's the one that went through the underwriting. And then what he did is I think he sliced off 15% to the right hand man in the company, which, 15% is better than no percent. So he felt good about that. But that's how we did that. And that's how we got that accomplished, to where the right hand man still was able to purchase a portion of the business, but he wasn't qualified to purchase the whole thing. And we were able to navigate it to a successful end for everybody.
Well, that's interesting. And then what about what I've been told is called a shotgun clause? Do you have anything like that when you're organizing things like that, where there's some type of partnership where there's a predefined way to get out that is not going to be, we're going to go debate about price, but it's the way it was described to me by my grandfather actually decades ago was basically he used it in real estate. One partner could at any time approach the other partner and say, "I'd like to buy you out for X and under these terms." And the other partner has two options: either accept or buy that person out under the same terms and conditions.
Well, sure, you can do that, but it's going to take a bank to be involved, or it's going to take both parties to be limber to do a long-term seller carry. Okay, so if you don't have the ability It doesn't matter. You call it a shotgun clause. It doesn't matter if it's a clause or not. It doesn't matter if it's written on paper. If it was signed by Jesus himself, it doesn't matter. If you can't walk into a bank and go borrow that money, it doesn't matter. Now, the buyer, the person wants to be bought out is forced to do a long-term seller carry, which would be a note paid at X amount of percent and paid over a certain amount of time. And that's your options right there. Now the seller, or I'm sorry, the person who would be paying the note to the person who wanted to be bought out could, well, I guess there could be a lawsuit there that says, this is what it says in the contract. He has to pay me. But what are they going to do? Give him a judgment? In which case, it's the same thing as a long-term seller carry note. So it's the old adage, you can't get blood out of a turnip. And so you got to be bankable to get that done. If not, it's got to be a seller carry.
Okay. Well, Chad, I'm curious. Do you have any? I know you're tight on time, so you have any last piece of advice for people? I know a lot of people are looking to sell their business. Some are looking to buy. What's the major takeaway that you'd have for them?
That's a great question. If you're a buyer of a business, you have to really realize that you're not important. That's the biggest thing I can tell you. And I'm going to expand on that. People think that they're going to spend money, so they're important. I mean, I'm the same way. I went and bought my Mercedes. I went and bought that AMG S63, beautiful car. I walked in there. I felt important because, damn it, I'm going to spend some money, and somebody better act like I'm going to spend some money. But that's not how this works. If you're a buyer, you got to realize that you're a buyer in a pool of other buyers. And right now, I have 3,000 buyers. If I were to bring on a really good opportunity that was making, let's just say it was making $500,000 or $700,000 a year, as soon as I send that out to my buyers, it would be like throwing a pork chop into a pack of wolves. It's not going to last long. So when buyers approach me in a entitled way, like, I've got money, this is what I'm looking for, no, I'm not going to do this, no, I'm not going to do that, they've got all these parameters. I'm like, man, you're talking yourself out of the game already. you know so buyers need to realize that they got to stay close to the hip to a good broker, because if you're not good to your broker and you're not willing to put an offer in quickly and trust your broker and be gracious and kind and respectful throughout the transaction, you're going to lose the deal. On the other hand, if you're a seller, you need to have realistic expectations about your purchase price. You need to bend for the buyer, because while the buyer is one of 200 people that might want that business, so he's not as important as what he thinks, he really is important to the seller. And you really want to treat him like your best friend. This is what I tell people. I sold a $3 million business not too long ago, and the seller was griping about the buyer, and I said, wait a minute, how many of your friends have paid you $3 million in your life? He said, nobody. No. I said, well, turns out this guy's your best friend. Why don't you start treating him like that? And that's how I approach it. A guy's getting ready to put his life on the line. He's got to go get blood taken. He's signing his houses over, every bit of collateral, life insurance policies. He's going through this bank process that's, it feels like surgery. The sellers need to be patient and kind with the buyers and treat them like they're their best friend. And frankly, as soon as somebody hands you a check for $1 million or 3 or 4 million, why aren't they your best friend? I mean, that's a hell of a guy, isn't it? To invest in your business and like what you built. And I typically find that buyers and sellers end up becoming lifelong friends afterwards, and that's what I'm after. I've never had a deal gone bad. That means that out of all the deals I've ever done, I've never had a bank default. I've never had a buyer call me and say, "Man, you sold me a bag of goods." I've never had a seller be so mad at me that it was the wrong buyer. Nothing like that. So a good broker is going to do his homework. going to get in there and get dirty and make sure be aggressive enough to make sure it's a right deal rather than being passive enough just to be a paycheck professional.
And roughly how many transactions have you done?
Good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. I don't know. Offhand, maybe 300.
See, I think that's a great place to end here. It's like 300 transactions, none of them gone bad.
Yeah.
And we're talking about somebody giving somebody else $3 or $4 million, which I'm sure the amounts vary. So we're talking about some good payouts and good wins, and never had one go bad.
Never.
So I mean, that's pretty
you want to know
impressive.
why?
So
You want to know why? It's because the buy process weeds it out. So if by the time we go through a 3 or 4 month process, if you're not coming to the table right, if the attitudes are off, it's not going to happen. So I always say the right buyer never buys the wrong business. In other words, we might think it's the right buyer, and we got buyer and seller are stepping in formation and everything's great, and then something happens and I'm like, man, that sucks because he was the perfect buyer, but turns out he wasn't. The next guy that comes along is. And so that's why it doesn't fail, is because the process is pretty excruciating as it is.
Yeah, I'm thinking painful.
Yeah, and so if you can't navigate that, it's kind of like this. If you want to become a Navy SEAL, if you can't make it through basic training and you can't make it through BUDS training, then you're not a Navy SEAL. And that's why once you become a Navy SEAL, there's not much dropout rate. So my boot camp, so to speak, is going to put you through the test to make sure you're behaving right. And that will ensure a good deal post sale.
Well, that's great. So how do people get a hold of you, Chad? We'll certainly post it on the podcast, but how do they get a hold of you?
Just go to petersonacquisitions.com, and they can also get a free download of the book. I wrote a book called Swinging Doors, A Guide to Selling Your Business. And if they let me know that I was on your podcast, that'd be great. And I'll send them a free copy of the book. And just fill out the contact form, and I'll be in touch with them.
Well, that's great. We got a lot of people, they're buying or selling. So I think this will be great for our audience. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thanks.
I enjoy it. Yeah, thank you.